Men going to learn not to mention my name in their videos.
Greetings. On your screen you see Tawab Ra, who about 9 months ago, a little bit more, posted a series of videos responding to my two-part series on Easter, the word Easter appearing in the King James Bible. Listen to his conspiracy theory explaining why the word Easter appears in Acts 12:4 of the King James Bible and not anywhere else.
Easter is in the King James Version Bible, but it's supposed to say Pascha, just like it does the other 20 times it's written. Only in Acts 12th chapter it says Easter. So one translator just went stupid. In all these different Gospels of the New Testament, here it is: Pascha, Passover, Pascha, Passover, Pascha, Passover, Pascha, Passover, Pascha, Passover, Pascha, Easter? Where the hell did Easter come from, man? Because it don't make no damn sense for Easter to be put in there. After it says Passover, the other damn 10, 15, 20 times is in the damn New Testament. And it says the same damn thing in Greek, Pascha. That means that somebody implemented that word there on purpose to push Roman Catholicism and paganism. Because all the other translations of Pascha said Passover, except for one time, Easter. Alright? Somebody inputted that there. And you say that, oh, Easter was observed by these men. The hell it was not. All these other times they put Passover, but one time it's Easter found for the word Pascha in Greek, which means Passover. If you don't see something fishy with that, then you're a dumb as hell camel jockey. The hell out of here. You're dumb as hell.
Okay, I had originally meant to make this addendum to my video on Easter a while ago, but I never got around to it. Anyway, anyone who wants to see Tawab Ra's full response can see his multi-part series, which is humorously titled KJV Translators for Camel Jockeys, al-MaseeHee, and it's on the Sword Cuts Sharply page account. Anyway, he posted it over 9 months ago, as I just said, and I wanted to respond just to this small portion because I figured others might consider the question that he raises to be a legitimate one. Of his massive multi-part series, a lot of it was just speculation and a lot of rambling, with all due respect to him. But this particular question about the fact that the Greek word Pascha appears in the New Testament 29 times, yet the King James Bible translators rendered it Easter only once. The other 28 times they rendered it Passover. So the question is, why render it as Passover all those other times and only one time put it as Easter? So this video will attempt to answer that question without making recourse to the conspiracy theory that Tawab Ra tried to employ. I'd like to begin by turning to the International Bible Encyclopedia. And turning to the entry on Easter, it's noted that the King James Version of Acts 12:4 merely followed the practice of certain previous translations of that verse. I share this simply to establish that employing the word Easter was not such an innovation at the time. This wasn't such a controversy. Other previous English translations employed the word Easter, so it wasn't so out of the ordinary for the King James Bible to employ the word Easter. Having said that, I'd also like to turn to the Hastings Dictionary of the Bible, and taking a look at the entry on Easter in that source, what we see is that the entry waves the word Easter off as a quote-unquote anachronism, meaning that it was the timing was wrong. They consider Easter to be a later development of the church, and therefore this should be Passover. Whatever the case, they treat this anachronism as having been inherited from earlier versions, which is also what appeared in the encyclopedia that we just looked at a second ago. So the point that I'm trying to make here, just by looking at these two sources very quickly, is that scholars don't resort to the conspiracy theory that Tawab Ra cooked up. This is because scholars know that the presence of the word Easter in the King James Bible goes back to the very first edition of the King James Bible. Tawab Ra claimed that the word was only added later, but he didn't offer any manuscript evidence documenting this change. For example, showing one edition that lacked it and then a later edition which suddenly had it. Because the reality is he has no manuscript evidence. Instead, he just offered pure speculation. Now, Having established that, to understand why Easter appears in Acts 12:4 in the King James Bible, we need to turn back to the translator's preface to the readers. The translators themselves made reference to earlier English translations, such as Puritan translations and Catholic translations, and they stated something interesting. They wrote the following, quote, "We have, on the one side, avoided the scrupulosity of the Puritans, who leave the old ecclesiastical words and betake them to other, as when they put washing for baptism or congregation instead of church. As also on the other side, we have shunned the obscurity of the papists in their azimes, tunicae, rational, holocausts, prepus, Pascha, and a number of other such like, whereof their late translation is full, and that of purpose to darken the sense." End quote. In other words, the King James translators complained that the Puritan translations employed language which was not ecclesiastical enough, while a certain Roman Catholic translation employed language which was too ecclesiastical, with its densely Latinate English. For example, azimes, or azymes, as some people call it, is referring to unleavened bread. Holocaust is referring to burnt offerings. Prepus, for those who know Spanish, they'll instantly think of the word prepucio. It refers to foreskin. And Pascha refers to the Passover or Easter in the language of the relevant translation. The Catholic translation that the translators of the King James Bible were referring to was the Douay-Rheims translation, which was completed a couple of years before the King James Bible. Okay, here we see the old Douay-Rheims translation of the start of Acts 12. You can see that in verse 4 the word Pascha appears. Everywhere that the Greek word Pascha appeared in the Greek New Testament, the Douay-Rheims rendered it Pascha. So let's discuss the Greek word Pascha. The Greek word Pascha is a transliteration of the Aramaic word for Passover, which is pronounced roughly the same way. The Aramaic word is simply the Hebrew word Pesach with the definite article at the end. In Aramaic, the definite article takes the form of an aleph appended to the end of the word. Now, having said that, here's something which Tawab Ra might not be aware of. The Greek word Pascha is also the Greek word for the Christian holiday which English speakers call English. And this is also the case in ecclesiastical Latin. In other words, in Greek, the word for Passover is Pascha. And in Greek, the word for the Christian holiday called Easter in English is also Pascha. And this is also the case in ecclesiastical Latin. The word Pascha can refer to the Jewish Passover or the Christian holiday which is called Easter. So it's the same word for the Jewish Passover and the Christian holiday. This is the case with actually most languages. For example, in Spanish, the word Pascua can refer to the Jewish Passover or the Christian holiday that we call Easter in English. This is why, for example, in Spanish one might say specifically Pascua de Resurrección to establish that this is the Pascha of the Resurrection, or Pascua of the Resurrection. And that is what the holiday called Easter in English is supposed to be, the Passover reinterpreted in light of Christ's resurrection. The Pascha of the Resurrection is only called Easter, quote-unquote Easter, in Teutonic languages or Germanic languages. For example, aside from English, in German it's called Oster, or Ostern. Apparently the old Teutonic or Germanic calendar was a lunar one, or a lunar solar calendar, but in part a lunar calendar. The months started with the new moon. And the Christian Pascha, the holiday of the church called Pascha, continuously fell in a month on the Teutonic calendar, which was named Oster, which was named after some sort of goddess worshipped by Germanic pagans. Therefore, because Pascha continuously fell in a month named Oster on the Teutonic calendar, the holiday came to colloquially take on that name amongst the people who spoke these Teutonic or Germanic languages, such as English speakers and German speakers. So now, having established this, let's return to the Greek word Pascha. Recall that the King James translators were part of the Church of England, which celebrated the Christian Pascha, or the holiday now called Easter. So imagine their situation. When they looked at the Greek text of the New Testament and saw the Greek word Pascha, they had to determine if it was referring to the old Jewish Passover, which is called Pascha in Greek, or the Christian Pascha of the Resurrection, which again is called Pascha in Greek. And again, this is a Pascha which is reinterpreted in light of the resurrection of Christ. At first glance, that might strike some as absurd, but note the following fact. The word Pascha appears in the New Testament 29 times. Acts 12:4, however, is the only clear reference to the Pascha being celebrated as a celebration that happened after the resurrection. And that's the sense in which the verse is unique for the King James translators. Remember, Tawab Ra's question, and it was one of incredulity, is why do we have 28 of the 29 instances where Pascha appears being translated as Passover, yet just one time it's translated as Easter? What's unique about that one verse? Well, that's what's unique about that one verse, is that it's a celebration of the Pascha after the resurrection. With the exception of 1 Corinthians 5:7, which calls Christ our Passover, all of the verses in the New Testament, aside from Acts 12, which employ the word Pascha, are referring to the holiday before the resurrection. Therefore, all those instances can't possibly be the Pascha of the resurrection. So, thus, all those other instances had to refer to the Jewish Pascha, called Passover in English. It can't those other 28 instances can't refer, well, 27, not counting 1 Corinthians 5:7. All those other instances can't possibly be referring to the reinterpreted Christian Pascha of the resurrection. Now, I should note that I'm not presenting this as a line of reasoning that the viewers will find persuasive. I'm merely explaining the line of reasoning employed by the translators of the King James Bible. And this is the line of reasoning which led them to put the word Easter in Acts 12:4. So here I'd like to recall that in my series on Easter in the King James Bible, I made note of the fact that the translators of the King James Bible leaned on the writings of Eusebius. They considered his writings authoritative and a source of proper information on church history. So with that in mind, I'd like to note what is found in Book 5 and Chapter 23 of Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History. It is there that Eusebius claims that the practice of holding Pascha on the resurrection of the Lord, or Lord's Day, i.e. Sunday, also called Kyriake in Greek, that this was an apostolic tradition. In other words, now the holiday called Easter, or Pascha in Greek and Latin, always falls on a Sunday, a so-called Sunday, Kyriake. And Eusebius said that practice goes all the way back to the apostles. There were disputes later on, but the practice itself goes all the way back to the apostles. Now, many viewers, and especially UPKers, will balk at the idea that Christ rose on the first day of the week, and they'll be especially doubtful of the claim that the apostles celebrated Pascha on specifically that day, on the first day of the week. But in this video, I'm not trying to convince anyone that Eusebius was right. Rather, I'm simply noting what Eusebius claimed and keeping in mind that the translators of the King James Bible leaned on Eusebius for information. So this brings me to my ultimate point. We have the Greek word Pascha, which can refer to the Jewish Passover or the Christian Pascha of the resurrection. Acts 12:4 is the only clear reference to Pascha being celebrated after the resurrection. The translators of the King James Version were partial to the writings of Eusebius, and Eusebius claimed that the apostles held the Christian Pascha of the resurrection on the Lord's Day, on Sunday, on Kyriake. In other words, from the perspective of people who trust Eusebius, Acts 12:4 could sensibly be referring to the Christian Pascha. And the Christian Pascha was called Easter in English, at least in the English of the time in which the King James Bible came about. Now, recall that the translators of the King James Version mocked a certain Catholic translation, the Douay Rheims, for being obscure. The translators of the King James Bible wanted to be as clear as possible, and thus, because they wanted to convey the idea that Acts 12:4 was referring to the Christian Pascha of the resurrection, they used the English word popular amongst the common people for that holiday. That word happened to be Easter. So in the end, we don't need to invoke any conspiracy theory to explain why the word Easter is employed only once in the King James Version. Easter was a popular word to describe the Christian Pascha, and the translators interpreted Acts 12:4 as referring to the Christian Pascha. It doesn't matter if one finds the reasoning of the King James translators flawed. The point of this video is only to explain why, of the 29 times the word Pascha appears in the Greek New Testament, that the King James Version rendered it Easter only once. Okay, on that note, I hope this answers the question asked by Tawab Ra. I guess he thought he was asking it rhetorically, but this should be a sufficient answer to the question, regardless of whether people like the sort of reasoning that went into this translation. Nonetheless, that was the reasoning behind it. So, in closing, I hope that the viewers of this video, including Tawab Ra if he watched it, have a wonderful Pascha.